All right. John Koetsier. Do I have that right?
Not at all. The
John
first name is right. John, you got that. It's amazing. You get an A plus. The second name, not so much. Koetsier, but you get a
Koetsier.
pass. Nobody gets it right. Koetsier,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, and again, this is from my ignorance of purposely not studying you ahead of time. I've never heard it
It's all
out loud.
good.
I've been a fan of yours on Facebook for years. You write really cool content. But for the audience, I'm going to be analyzing John with using the personality psychology framework of the objective personality system to discover as much as we can in about 30 to 45 minutes, which of 512 archetypes he would be closest to, using the information primarily gleaned from this interview. So you can see live how this is done so that you can both understand John and how he operates and how that makes him successful in what he does, and also be able to pick this up and build it as a skill for yourself in analyzing others, and also being able to understand yourself in relation to other people through watching this. So John, to kick things off, will you share with us a little bit about your background, some of your story, key things that you're up to, just a little bit about yourself?
When people ask what I do, and that's not exactly the question you asked, but I'll start there. When people ask what I do, I usually say I learn stuff and I share stuff, because that's the simplest way I can go about saying it. I grew up near Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I always wanted to be a journalist. I was always a reader. I was reading about 550 words a minute in grade 5. Then my teacher timed me turning the pages in a book and told me that without
Interesting.
me asking her
And was
to.
that natural?
That was natural. That was
So
just
you're
me
naturally a very
trusting.
quick reader. Okay.
Yes, yes. I love to explore new worlds and new information, synthesize it, share it. So anyways, I went to university, got my undergraduate degree, and actually became a staff writer for an educational company. Wasn't a journalist. Changed jobs about 5 times in the same company. Ended up doing the technology for the company, building websites and apps and other stuff like that, leading a small team doing that. So I brought technology and kind of the art and writing, sorry, together in some sense. Switched out to a software company, did some deals
Real
with
quick, what is it about that technology that interests you?
creating stuff, making stuff, doing cool stuff. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, according to Arthur C. Clarke, who was a scientist who invented the concept of geosynchronous satellites and a very excellent science fiction author. So just creating stuff that didn't exist before. That's amazing. Making stuff happen autonomously, doubling, tripling, quadrupling, 10xing what you could do physically, manually with technology. So that was cool. And then I became COO of a small software company. We did some deals with Disney, with Intel, other stuff like that. It was a couple years, had some fun, did some stuff, left and went to another software company. Didn't really work out, got sold to another company, molded around for like four
When you
months.
were when you were doing these companies, you were the founder.
No, I was a COO, Chief Operating
Oh,
Officer
gotcha.
of this company, EasyBit Software. It was very small, tiny. It was a Russian dude who did some business in Russia, came to Canada with a little bit of money, started some stuff. We had development in Ukraine, and we built basically a shell for the Classmate PC, which was Intel's attempted platform for bringing technology into the classroom. And so it was pretty cool. We did some pretty cool stuff, but ultimately the technology base was utter crap and
Hmm.
we failed.
How did you feel about being in a COO role? Like, how did that end up, and how did you feel in that position, and how
it,
now would you kind of regard that?
it was so small that honestly it was like an honorary title. It wasn't like I had a team of 50 people or something like that. We were tiny. We were maybe 13 people in the company, something like that, right? So it was just pick a hat, and do some
Okay.
stuff. In a startup, as you probably know, you do everything because you don't have defined departments and roles and everything like that. And So you do what you have to do. So anyways, moved on from there. And then a couple years after that, I was just kind of moldering around, didn't really find what I was doing, and it didn't really have a clear path forward. I started writing for $25 an article for VentureBeat, which is a tech news site that initially focused on startups and venture capital and stuff like that, obviously technology focus. And that just sort of snowballed over the course of a couple years, and eventually was there full time, and eventually then wanted to build something. So then I built a small department there, which was an intelligence research division. We raised a little bit of capital for that, a couple $1 million, built that up to about 7 figures of annual revenue, and then flipped out and went on my own.
Well, so I want to digest for a moment some of the things you said, and then prod a little bit more. The one note about this process I'm doing with you is not scientific, but what made this system scientific is that if somebody else were independently watching your interview, not biased by my thinking, and they were coming to the same conclusions independently that I was, then it's not as much about you self-reporting, because we can choose to believe or not believe the things you're saying or notice what you're choosing to focus on and such. But if we come to the same conclusions, then we're kind of more objectively in reality seeing you. And through this process and thousands of people of like trained experts analyzing people, just throwing shit at the wall, seeing what's trackable in reality, this sort of system emerged.
Cool.
And nothing like this has ever been done before. There's been no scientific frameworks or tests in personality psychology that would have any sense in, for example, like A/B testing. The frameworks are purely theoretical, they're purely self-reported, whereas this is a system built by what's trackable and not based on self-reporting. Usually it's done by watching like interviews and such of famous people.
Sure.
But what I'm noticing is that even from the beginning, you said that you read very quickly. And there's one of the types of ways of like receiving or dealing with information is called intuition. And my guess is that you have broad intuition. It can be either deep, where it's more like about organizing and like distilling things down. And then there's broad, which is still abstract. It's noticing patterns, things like that. But it usually is like more about creativity, possibilities. And so that I've noticed is the fastest thinking kind of mind. They can almost like multi-thread or multitask their brains. It's almost like you're drawing a bunch of stars. You can see all the possibilities of all the different kinds of like lines I can connect. Does that sound like ringing a bell at all?
It does sound like it's ringing a bell. It's interesting. I've described myself as a default yes person. In other words, hey, what about that? That's interesting. Let's check that out. Hey, what about that? Is that interesting? Should we try that? Why not? That sort of thing.
So that's very much a gatherer tendency, which the broad information types have, in juxtaposition to like an organizer who's more like, oh, let's go back to the conversation thread that we didn't finish before. Let's check what's inside the box before gathering new things. So it sounds like you're a gatherer. And then there's concrete gathering, which is the sensory type, and there's the intuitive type. Noticing even while you're talking, your eyes were moving around a lot, and it's not like you're in the physical world, but it's like your eyes are wiring in abstract space connections that your brain is creating, like almost spontaneously. It's like you're creating these connections. And abstract people tend to do that more often, where it's almost like they're in multi-dimensions at the same time.
Cool.
So that's something else I'm observing.
Cool.
You joined a startup, which is a lot more common for gatherers in general because they're usually more comfortable with risk and chaos, and they like new things a lot. You mentioned that wearing lots of hats. And a lot of a chief operating officer's job is to just kind of like play bop it with things. You said that was just a role you picked, but it's just kind of like fixing problems as they arise.
Yeah.
Whereas organizers, for example, more like want to systematize like one thing or like sharpen or like focus on stuff.
And you need those people at certain times as well.
So overall, I'm going to like early on make a kind of biased judgment towards extrovert intuition. That said, that doesn't mean it's necessarily the strongest component in your psychology. It could be the second strongest, but I'm going to put it up there in the top couple.
Cool.
If there's a different, so I'm going to ask you some questions about like kind of human needs, and tell me which of these sounds like more like you or less like you, and if any of them stick out more or less. So one is that everybody has a need for self and tribe. The need for self is to kind of have your identity, your own way, looking out for yourself. But you also have a need for a tribe because we're a hypersocial species and we evolved in tribes. So you want to know, like, what is the tribe thinking? What is the tribe value? What's working in external reality that other people are doing, looking after the other people. So people that are like self first, they care about the tribe, but they'll kind of do it by building themselves up and then like building something and then going like, here you go, like, do you like it? But they kind of get caught up in their own little like scope. Whereas the tribe people, they're helping the tribe constantly, sometimes over sacrificing, but a lot of it's that the tribe kind of like takes care of them as well. So they're both kind of doing both, but they're going from opposite directions to kind of do the things. Do either of those stand out much more than the other?
Self.
Self. Okay, interesting. And then I can't believe everything you say automatically, but I look for patterns of things. The other axis is organization and control, but I'm already going to mark you as, as a gatherer and organizer, but I'm going to mark you as a gatherer because that part's clear. So with the self side, okay, so that, I guess I'll mention the organizing and gathering, or the organizing and gathering, and tell me if like one of those stands out more than the self tribe axes of like being more extreme of like self versus tribe or organization versus gathering. But the gathering again is like looking for new things, being comfortable with the unknown, kind of like gathering almost so that you feel like you have like stability because you have lots of things, so that makes you comfortable. Whereas organizers are like, oh, if I'm responsible, if I perfect this, and that gives me freedom later. So it's sort of like freedom first or freedom later. But ultimately, that's the crux.
That's a really tough one for me because I love novelty. I love new things. I love new ideas. I love trying new things, going new places, all that stuff. But I also, I don't like chaos in my personal environment, or I do like things to have a place, be put in a place and remain in that place. And when I'm finished doing something with something, I want those things to go back there. So that's a tough one to say I want to pick one of those extremes. I feel like if I have kind of a solid base, that gives me the freedom from which to go and do crazy stuff.
So that's very much in line with extroverted intuition, because its opposite is like the broad intuition. The opposite of that's the kind of deep sensory. It's the most like you want your physical world organized, whereas somebody who's like a gathering sensory, they want their conceptual world organized. So you kind of want the physical stability so that you have the freedom to kind of like mentally go everywhere.
Yeah, I prefer to be a minimalist.
So I guess we'll get back to that a tiny bit. There's one other thing I want to inspect around that is, so half the population is generally more focused on people, whether that's the group or themselves, and half is more focused on like information and things. It's ironic because the people focused more on like information, for example, are actually worse with information, because they're over focusing on like facts or patterns and not seeing the other half of the picture in a balanced way. It's like kind of like a yin yang where reality is in the middle. But if somebody's focused on like information, they're probably really balanced with themselves and the tribe and logic and emotions, and they're usually like pretty chill with that stuff. And so they're actually like usually pretty like easy with people, but they might, like, if they're a sensory person, be like drawing the wrong conclusions, where it's like, oh, a ghost did it. Or if they're like an intuitive type, they might believe a giant conspiracy theory where there's not enough data to actually prove it, but they see the pattern. Whereas on the other hand, you have the people who are more focused on people, where either if it's like the self, or whether it's the self or tribe, if it's the tribe, they're kind of like overly, in tune with the tribe. If it's self, they're overly in tune with their own thoughts and ideas. But they're actually more balanced with information because they're correctly like gathering and organizing information and balancing like the factual and abstract worlds. So do either of those ping more to you? Like, do you believe in a lot of conspiracies? Do you jump on ideas like very, very quickly, or are you prone to kind of, especially at younger ages, like kind of like over believe possibly your ideas? Or would you say that you have an easier time with like people where you can make fun of yourself and not take things too seriously, and like not have like giant kind of like tidal waves with that stuff, and sort of like not have like giant like tribe people problems that often.
It's an interesting question because, of course, everybody who believes a conspiracy theory, it's not a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
What do you mean
for
I
sure.
believe conspiracy theories? So I really resonate with the strong opinions loosely held thing that some startup guru said somewhere, some VC I think said. And so I definitely have strong opinions, and I like to understand to some level what's going on in the world. That said, I think everything is contingent on data and data accuracy, right? So, I'm open and willing to change my mind as I see other data that impacts that. And I'm pretty versed in the kind of flaws in human thinking,
Hmm.
where we quickly want to assign meaning to something that doesn't necessarily have meaning, or we quickly want to, there's the pattern, and there's Cassiopeia in the skies. Well, you know what? Cassiopeia is a pattern for us where we are. We see that constellation.
Mm.
If you were, 50 light years that way, you wouldn't see Cassiopeia the way we see Cassiopeia, right? So I think that I don't know how to answer your question. I love people.
Yeah.
I love being with people, but I also love being with myself, and I like information, and I like finding learning. Learning is fun. I enjoy learning. I enjoy seeing other people's perspectives. They're reading a book or watching something, that sort of thing. But I am I've never been able to fixate myself somewhere on this introvert extrovert scale. Let's put it that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, in this, there's like many different kinds of introversion, extroversion in different ways. It's not just as simple as like a linear scale or like only socially. So there's another way to approach this. There's a lot of different kinds of cross checks, a lot of different kinds of binary coins you can look at. And one of them that could help us is, well, I guess we've established that you're maybe self above tribe actually. And if that's the case, then you would have a what's known as consume as a behavior, as a default behavior. If you think about these sorts of ways of thinking as kind of like muscles, these are like muscle groups where you could drop something and you could pick it up with your back or your like biceps or your legs, and our brains will naturally do whatever's easiest for us, like our bodies do, to preserve energy and to kind of get the best result with what we're strong with. So if you are gathering patterns and you also have like kind of the internal compass, it could be more of like kind of a logical or value driven version. But regardless, you would have what's known as consume as your primary behavior. So in a resting state, I mean, you can always overuse a muscle, but in a resting state, learning is very easy for you.
Mm-hmm.
It like would almost energize you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whereas for people where that's kind of like their lowest behavior, that's like a stressful activity where it drains them. It's like learning things. Does that sound accurate for you?
Yeah, I think it does sound accurate.
So from there, you could either swing into your like kind of deep decider function, and you could swing into sleep energy, which is a behavior where it's about processing, planning, reflecting, thinking. People with strong sleep tend to like notice if they're sick, be good at taking care of themselves. Sometimes they'll like have more trouble waking up in
That
the
is not
morning.
me.
Okay, okay. So you would say that you swing maybe more towards this one as play energy,
Yeah,
where it's like pinging off the tribe, interviewing people, being hands-on, like asking strangers for their advice, stuff like that.
sure. Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
so consume into play. Then from play, you would either go into the sleep or into what's known as blast, which is taking your known information and being able to articulate it, shoot it out. It's usually very good at getting started, like teaching. People that have low blast tend to kind of like not want to talk a lot or have like trouble articulating. At this point, you're older, so I assume you've sort of become more balanced in your psychology, but this would refer mostly to like your 20s and pre-20s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whereas then there's the sleep energy, which is the kind of like reflecting, thinking, pausing between
Definitely on the
stuff.
blast.
Blast.
Absolutely. Learn something, share it, whether that's Twitter or Facebook, LinkedIn, or my podcast, Tech First, or my blog, or whatever.
So if this is the case, if you have consume, play, blast, sleep, you and I have the same behavior pattern.
Interesting.
And I kind of detect that you and I have a little bit of a similar energy about us. We use different functions, possibly. I have the more data gathering than abstract gathering, but that is
Cool.
like I'm sensing something there.
Cool.
So that overall would basically put you as like more on the extroverted side, but you wouldn't be like an extreme extrovert because your first behavior is consuming, which is a more introverted activity. It's like taking outside information in for the self, but then you swing extroverted from there.
I think that makes a lot of sense, actually, and that's cool. And because I mean, one of the things about an extrovert introvert is where do you get energy from, right? And I love people. I love being with people. I love interacting with people, but I definitely need some time away from people.
Yeah. So you probably like breaking off, learning, absorbing stuff like kind of on your own, or not having to engage necessarily as like a kind of recharge activity. Cool. So let's take a look at your deep decider function, and find out if it's more the thinker or feeler modality. Actually, before we go on, have you taken a Myers-Briggs or 16 personalities type test before?
I think I did. There was a time when I was with a company that they were big into Myers-Briggs. I know some people are always like, I'm a blah, blah, I'm a blah, blah. And I'm like,
it's like a 4-letter code.
Yeah. What the heck is that? Do you think that that defines who you are? I mean, because I've never wanted to be defined by some little random string of letters or numbers or something like that. So I think I did one, but part of one, I don't recall what happened out of it. Honestly, I'm not sure.
Okay, I was curious for reference. Those things are all theoretical frameworks. They have some value, but they're not totally accurate. Like, for example, my psychological type in this, as determined by the experts, is actually a different type than any test has ever told me. It makes the most sense, what they've told me. But, you know, when you're self-reporting and all this stuff, like you're never actually going to see reality.
Exactly. Who are we really? And who do we tell ourselves we are? And who do we tell others we are?
But
how do we want others to perceive us?
The broad intuition is very much about possibilities. Like even you talk about the constellation, you can see it this way and this way, or you're like, oh, even this framework is like trying to box me, because you want to remain free to gather possibilities. So anything that's going to kind of trap you is going to like stress you out. So even just,
I mean, ultimately, you do need to make conclusions because you can't act without conclusions, right? You need to act to make things happen in the world. Absolutely. Right. But you can do that while not necessarily having to fully 100% believe that I understand everything, I see everything, I know everything, and I have the absolute answer as to what's going on here. If I have good enough information, excellent, go for it. Contingent, there we go. If I learn more, then I change, whatever. That's easy.
So we're over halfway done now. I think honing in.
And we didn't even go through the whole career story, but it's all good.
So once we get more information, I would like to kind of like ask those things, and then the audience can kind of contextualize and be like, oh, like I could see now like how his mind works. Like, for example, the fact that you read fast. Broad, intuitive people tend to have quick minds. Something else I've noticed, especially, actually, I'll mention that later. But a question is, so when it comes to your deep decision-making function, would you say that you identify more with like you make decisions based kind of on your values, your likes, your tastes? Or do you think you're a bit more biased to have more of like an engineer kind of thinking where you're like stacking lots of like reasons or logics and math?
I think that I like to think that I have more of the engineer type of model, you know, the pros and the cons and what weighing it. And
we all make emotional decisions at the end of the day, but this is just like a layer in between.
So definitely there's a piece of that. And I think we all have that to some degree, but definitely there's a high intuitive that feels right. And I'm going for that. And I think that one of the things that come to mind there is that the perfect is enemy of good. Right? Like you can try for the perfect solution, and guess what? You might randomly get there. You might get there because you're freaking amazing and you're just incredible. And you might get there after 10 years. And guess what? It's no longer relevant. If I have a good enough solution to proceed to the next step, that's all I need. Go for it. When I'm there, then I'll go where I need to go after that.
So that's sounding to me more like the deep feeling function, because that plugs into its opposite. These kind of exist where like one's subjective, one's objective. You kind of need like something relative to something else to define it, or like kind of like an anchor and something flexible. The broad logic version, not the deep logic, but if you have the deep feeling, it's connected to the broad logic. And that one is a little bit less attached to its own ideas, which I'm starting to get kind of a pattern of noticing, that you don't seem like, oh, I thought of this and therefore this is like the only truth.
I hate that mentality.
And so broad logic is less attached to their ideas. They kind of pick and choose, like, oh, this one's working. Like this one's not there. It's less, a little less engineer, but more almost like a business person, where they're kind of like seeing the middle ground, seeing the whole chessboard, knowing how things are moving around better. And that ties with the deep feeling. And the deep feelings, I think, the funniest function, because these other functions have very clear roles, but deep feeling is just like your likes and your tastes and your values. And that's not like a tool. It's not like you can like build a structure with that or like understand something with it. But what it kind of is like a superpower, where if you've ever watched like anime or those stories where there's kind of like the character that's like just tries really, really hard and just through like effort and passion, like kind of like sprints past everybody. That's sort of like what the deep feeling is like.
Yes, that's the fantasy, right? If I just try hard enough in this one moment. And of course, we forget that, everything that we do is built on a foundation of years of experiments, of learning, of development, of skill and ability and all that stuff. Yes.
But then the deep feeling people are passionate enough to often stick with it for those years, even if it's not successful or something, because they just like it.
Yep.
Does that ring a bell with you a little bit? Like, do you
does.
tend to get very passionate about things?
Yep, I do.
In general. Okay, so technically, it's looking like you're like in a traditional Myers-Briggs ENFP, which is generally a type that's very creative, likes variety, very abstract. In this system, there's 512 types. There's certain hybrid types that don't exist in Myers-Briggs, or you could even be a Myers-Briggs type that's like way different than a normal. For example, I'm an ISTP, but I'm like the most social version, so I'm actually more extroverted than introverted as a subtype. Okay, so the last bit that we're going to look at is essentially each of these different types of functions that you have, like the broad, intuition, and such, can either be like more like hard, rigid, or like soft, gentle, open, movable. And again, it's that kind of like opposites part. And whatever is like on the outside, you have the opposite on the inside. So with your, I guess let's look at your deep feeling first. Like if that part, for example, were more rigid and assertive, that means that you'd be like really like strong about your tastes. Like you would not budge on those very much. But when it comes to like the logic, you'd be like extra easy to like come and go with ideas, and you'd probably be more gentle with the tribe because your logic's broad and it's kind of filtering out to the tribe more. Whereas if your feelings are deep, they're more personal. The opposite would be like if you were more assertive with your logic, with the broad logic, you'd kind of be more direct, straightforward, blunt with people. And that's sort of like almost to protect like a softer, more movable, deep feeling world. It's almost like a dog like barking on the outside to kind of protect the inside. Whereas the opposite is more like a cat where you're like poke, 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 and then eventually it just like scratches you and like without warning.
Probably more on the dog side.
More on the dog side. So and that's actually less common. Most of these are evenly distributed in the population, but for some reason, more people are more kind of soft or gentle on the outside nowadays. Maybe it's the social appropriateness stuff going on. But you'd say that you tend to call a spade, tell people the harsh truth that they need to hear.
Yes, not always. I have
So
learned some tact.
Something interesting about broad intuition is you can detect lies more easily because you can see all the possibilities that other people might not notice the lie because they don't see the pattern. And also it comes with being able to like tell alternative truths easily because you don't just only see like the truth, but you see the possible truths.
Interesting.
So you would say that you feel more hard around the logic than about like personal like music or a style or something.
Yeah, I kind of think so. I have pretty definitive style and pretty definitive not style and, pretty definitive ideas about what I like or don't like for decor or architecture or design, those sorts of things. Yeah.
So you stand by those things, but how like rigid are you on them? For example, like if you are at a party and there's music that you don't like, um, but like most of the people seem to be having a good time and not noticing, like does it kind of bother you? Like, or like it'll bother you, but does how much does it bother you? Like, do you feel like, oh, I want to change the music, or are you like, okay, whatever?
Um, I feel like I can tune stuff out. I feel like I can focus on something else, probably not forever, but for a period of time.
So the last bit here will be the intuition and the sensory part, is if that's more masculine or feminine. If you're more like kind of hard masculine with the sensory world, that means that you're going to be more easy with your ideas. Like they're going to be more flexible. Kind of concrete sensory is usually better with like time awareness, athletics, um, like spatial awareness, things like that. Whereas people who are more movable on that dimension tend to be like accidentally late more often. Again, you're older now, so you've probably got better systems and like awareness of things. But do either of those sound more like you?
I'm not sure I heard enough about either of them to make a call, but I'll just tell you I love sports. I love athletics. I play ice hockey. I've played pretty much most sports. I like to be
Okay,
on time. I don't like to be super late.
that's gonna be. I'm gonna go ahead and say that's kind of the more rigid sensory. The people who are more soft there, like they don't like ice hockey. They don't want to like hit, punch, like do things like that. Okay, so masculine sensory and probably the masculine with the tribe, possibly. So something interesting that's shown up with this is that there's different modalities about whether you're like an audio, visual, kinesthetic, or tester person that shows up based on the combination of these. It's strange, I don't know why, but at scale, it's showing up in thousands of people, this pattern. If you were kind of like double rigid on your like functions, like certain functions, you would be a more kinesthetic person.
Mhm.
Or if you were more soft with the tribe, but still rigid with the physical world, then you would be a more auditory person.
Mm,
Do
interesting.
either of those like ring more with you? Auditory, you might be strong with words, listen to things on super fast. Whereas kinesthetic, you might really want things to be more hands-on and like tactile learning and stuff.
That's a tough one. I make podcasts, but I don't listen to a lot of them.
Hmm.
If I'm absorbing information, I prefer not to do it spoken because I can do it way faster by reading.
Hmm.
I do like physical things in the physical world and what's that feel like? What's that look like? What's that, let's put that together, that sort of thing. So I guess I would lean more there.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and type you as kind of double rigid with the physical world and with the tribe, and as a kinesthetic type person. So if that's the case, you would be overall, I'm going to go ahead and say biased towards a primary function with information, of broad intuition.
Hmm.
You're kind of like superpower, but also Achilles heel would be imagining possibilities, um, because you do seem to
Having
be
to pick
balanced.
one thing to do, having to pick one business to create, having to pick, yeah, it's challenging.
So that's so the human need that you're kind of like fulfilling is like kind of freedom and gathering, but it's also in a way like that kind of gives you stability, because it's like if I have tons of experience or know tons of things, then I'm kind of like stable and that I can take care of myself or like collect the things that I need. You do seem more balanced on kind of like logic and emotion and like yourself and others and such. Also, I wonder if will you dive into kind of like what inspires you to be a journalist and to do podcasting and that kind of like what do you think it is that puts you into this line of work?
I love learning. I love learning new things, learning about new possibilities. And when I left VentureBeat after building that division, I took on a few clients, but I also became a senior contributor at Forbes because I couldn't not write. I couldn't
Hmm.
not share things. So I love doing that. And so, seeing something new that's happening that's cool, seeing an insight that's interesting, seeing data that shows something that, hey, wow, this is happening, that gives us an understanding of something that we didn't know before, that gives us a capability that we didn't think we had before. I love to see that, hear that, understand that, and share that. And so that's what I do. And I do like 5 different podcasts, as well as writing at Forbes and having about 4 or 5 long-term clients. And that's the business I've created, which I really enjoy.
So seeing this, the part that I was the most shaky on was that part about, is the broad gathering your primary thing? And even in that, you're very much focusing on the information and the things, more so than the people. Somebody could answer that and say like, oh, people deserve to have a truth and some people are lying, and kind of like make it about people, but you make it about the stuff.
Yep, 100%.
So that's interesting.
It is interesting that somebody that I partner with on a number of different podcasts, Peggy Ann Saltz, she's also a Forbes contributor based in Germany, but American by birth. She's more on the people side. And so when we do a podcast together, she wants to do a pre-call and talk to the person beforehand and blah, blah, blah. I don't care. I don't want to do that. What's our topic? I'll figure out questions that I'm interested in, and I'll ask those. And if you bring out other interesting stuff, great, awesome, let's do it.
So you're just following the threads. What are some things that you would say that you've learned as you've gone along that didn't come as naturally to you?
Have hard conversations in person rather than electronically.
Does a phone count?
Kind of, yes. At least it's real time. Don't send difficult messages via email. They may get misconstrued. And then I think.
Would you say that because, for example, you can interpret things in so many different ways, or because you can see that other people might not be as good at interpreting things as you are at crafting them because they lack that ability to kind of like gather the right pattern?
I think both those things are true, but I think it's also true that I will speak to you differently when I'm looking into your eyes than when I'm looking at a screen and firing off an email, and I'm maybe in a bad mood, maybe I'm pissed off, whatever. And I think it's a much more productive way to do it when I'm looking in your eyes, and I can say something. I can judge how's he reacting to that. Is he turning away? Is he closing down? Is he like, what are you, starting to try and interject, and I can tune what I'm saying so that I'm not creating the wrong impression. But it's also that's as much about me as it is about you, because the problem, I tend to want to do things quickly. I tend to have strong opinions. I tend to feel like, hey, that's the way to go. And the risk is being an asshole. And so I think it's really important for me to slow down, to listen,
Interesting.
to be patient. Patience is not my superpower. Patience is, I'm not a patient person. I am a very impatient person, which is a real problem when you're dealing with people that are not like you or feel differently about things. And so I've had to try to teach myself that, and I have done to some extent, but that will be a lifelong journey.
So this is super highly relevant, like wisdom and insights for people like you who are self above tribe, including myself. That kind of, because we often get accused of being assholes because we don't think about them first. We think first and then we think broad to them. The other thing is also you being kind of a double rigid with the sensory and physical also often gets accused of being an asshole because it's sort of more direct, straightforward. So like to temper that, or that you're aware of that, or that you learn like, oh, it's not always good to just like bam, like straightforward, shows a lot of maturity, because we're all biased to, just naturally be ourselves, which is often good, and it works at scale in the society to get specialists, but individually we can be a lot more successful because the world requires everything, being more adaptable.
And just because something is natural to us doesn't make it good.
Yeah. So just a couple last questions. Actually, I guess the calculations would say that you have ADHD.
Interesting.
Because it's not that it's like in a disorder sort of way, but just that broad pattern gathering is like the most ADHD-ish function, because you want freedom, your brain's going quickly. And also you have the sleep energy as your weakest behavior, your last behavior, which is also associated with ADHD because you kind of want to go from thing to thing. You don't like stop and pause and like breaks and stuff. So if you put those together, out of like an average 16 or so people, just the math says that you would be the most like naturally ADHD-ish.
Interesting.
It's just an automatic thing that comes with your strengths.
Huh. I have the ability to focus for long periods of time. I don't know what that means. I don't know. I'm not a clinician. I don't understand the technical definition of ADHD, but my impression of ADHD is can't focus, can't settle down, can't work hard, can't make things
A
happen.
lot of the times it's not being able to do those things on things that don't interest them.
Uh,
So they can hyper focus if it's interesting to them, but they basically have possibly a shorter dopamine, like a smaller resting dopamine amount. So they need more interest or stimulation to be able to be engaged, to force themselves to do things.
I could see myself being somewhere on that spectrum then.
It's generally a trait of gatherers or sleep low people, which I also am. But that was just something I kind of wanted to check in with you about. Would you say that there's any tools that you've learned or established or created to kind of manage yourself?
Physical exercise. I especially during the pandemic, but always I've loved. I love the ability to do something and to forget everything else and to just engage in it. That's the best thing about sports for me. Ice hockey, when you're on the ice, it's all you're thinking about. You're not thinking about the challenges, the debts, the projects, the this needs to be done, that needs to be done, whatever. You're just engaged, fully zoned in on it. And if you're not, you get hit. And it's dangerous. So there you go, right? So
a little
I
bit
love
of
that.
danger.
Exactly. So, I mean, what I do is every morning before work, I have a 30-minute walk. I love that. I enjoy that. I can relax. I can meditate. I can pray. I can walk. I can enjoy that. I take a walk that splits up my morning work periods, about half an hour. My wife and I do that together. That gives us a good chance to talk and chat and whatever, all that stuff, which I hate to do when I'm just sitting down, and not doing something. And then usually lunchtime is spent doing a workout. I built a gym on my deck right out there. And then I often take an afternoon walk, and maybe do something in the evening as well. But the afternoon walk splits up the 2 work periods in the afternoon.
So in a way, it sort of acts as like a funnel to get extra energy out, but it's also like a meditation for you to kind of like, because you're lower in the sleep energy where you're not just like sitting there as often doing nothing. I mean, often thinking, but you kind of get that meditation, that focus through exercise.
Yep.
Would you share a little bit about things you're up to now? I know you have a podcast. Is there anything you kind of want to like share that you're up to?
Yeah, it's an interesting time in my life. I will turn 50 in 24 days.
Wow, you have a much younger than 50-year-old energy.
I know that's normal in my family. My family is Dutch, but moved to Canada in the 50s after the Second World War. And that is fairly normal in my family. And I'm starting to think about what my life looks like down the road. And the pandemic, as horrific and awful as it's been for the world globally and many people economically, has been it's accelerated my business probably 5x. And so there's what I do is I find stuff that's interesting. I write about it. I interview interesting people. I publish my podcast on as a video on YouTube, as an audio on all the audio podcast, all podcast platforms, and then I write a story about it on my Forbes column. And full transcript on my website. And so I do that as my core activity. Around that, I've built 4 or 5 different clients who I do often podcasts for, but other times, like in an hour or so, I'll be emceeing a webinar for one of my clients. And I'll be doing other things like building out research reports, those sorts of things that allow them to do thought leadership, lead gen, other stuff like that. And that's been really, really good. I've dabbled in crypto. I have a creator coin that's worked out really, really well.
The broad
And
intuitives are often the early adopters in crypto because they can see the possibilities before other people do.
exactly. And so, now I'm looking at what do I want my life to look like for the next little while. I have a list that keeps getting bigger of places I want to go, places I want to visit, things I want to do. I'm working more now than I've ever worked before in my life. I'm enjoying it. And you heard my schedule earlier. It's not like I'm, sitting down at the desk slaving, 12 hours straight, but most Saturdays I do half a day of work, and I enjoy everything I do. If I don't enjoy it, I don't do it. But there are other things as well. And so I'm starting to look at, what does that look like? What's that feel like? And my wife and I are having those conversations where we want to be. So it's an interesting time in my life.
So it sounds like you get a lot of fuel by doing things that you're passionate about that enables you to like dive in deeper, spend time on the weekends. You seem very well informed, like you're constantly gathering information quite a lot. Not just to consume, but the play energy is also gathering. So you have both of the behaviors at the top.
Right.
So you're probably a super learner. Cool. Would you say that your strength as a journalist is maybe just being well informed, curious, passionate, enthusiastic, and then kind of like extrapolating on the ideas yourself?
I think that's a piece of it. I think that you can be there's a couple of kinds of journalists, right? And there's the AP, Associated Press, Reuters. A rock dropped from a tower in Moscow today at 12:15, and there's the facts. And there's a good part of that journalism. We have way too
I'm a
much
sensory thinker, so we're the fact reporters.
exactly. And that's really, really good. On the opposite end, you've got maybe the BuzzFeed does some good journalism, don't get me wrong, but there's some other stuff, maybe the HuffPo or whatever. This rock was awful. It was horrible. It had a crack in it. It was ugly. And when it dropped, it made a nasty sound, right? So there's like the facts and the emotion or what I like to be factual, but contextual. What does it mean? What does it connect with? Why is it important? Why should you care? How does it matter for the world? So I think that's important, but I do sometimes bring in some of the emotion. And so like when Elon Musk brought out the Cybertruck, I said, ugly as sin in my title. But anyways.
Couldn't resist. Wow. Well, John, thank you so much for being brave and stepping on this podcast as a first guest.
Yeah.
Will you share about if people want to follow you to like kind of glean off of your insights, because you really are like a hyper learner. You're very experienced. You've been processing this stuff. You're very successful. So I think that like I enjoy following you on Facebook quite a lot. So what's your Twitter? What's the name of your podcast? What are the main places people should look to find you?
Google is my resume. So there you go. John Koetsier. You won't be able to Google me because you can't spell my last name. If you search
I just don't know how to say it.
You'll find me. If you search the Tech First Podcast, you'll find me. That's all good. I'm sure you'll share a few links here and there, but that's all fine. I said yes to this because it was a different experience. I thought, okay, do I have to be on the couch? What is this? I'm being psychoanalyzed on podcast live, high risk. What if I come off as a complete loser? But it could be interesting. So let's give it a shot. And
So
I've really enjoyed it. I need to share this with my wife. I really do.
I mean, I feel like I know you like so much better now. Like, I mean, I didn't know you too well before, but now I feel like I understand you. Like, if you were the self at the top of the psychology person, you take yourself a lot more seriously. You never want to like be embarrassed. It's like almost more neurotic. But you're definitely the information first, where you're like whatever.
Yep.
That's a super strength of yours.
Awesome.
Cool.
Let me know when this comes out. I got a lot of people to share it with.
Glad. All right. Well, take care, John. Pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
You bet. Bye.